In 1949, Ravenshade Manor sought above the violent cliffs of northern Scotland. The Ashcroft family, one of the wealthiest lineages in Europe, owned the estate until a single night in December, when all 27 family members and servants vanished. When local police arrived the next morning, they found the beds still warm and unfinished food on the dining tables. There were no signs of a struggle and no biological traces left behind. The family had simply ceased to exist in the middle of their evening routine. A singular detail defied every logical explanation. Every clock inside the mansion, from the grand-grandfather clocks to the servants' pocket watches, had stopped at exactly 2:43 a.m. Over the following decades, a string of missing persons cases quietly led back to the manor grounds. Authorities dismissed these reports as local superstition, choosing to ignore the pattern rather than confront the anomalies inside the gates. The 1949 disappearance suggests an instantaneous suspension of reality. By treating the event as a cold case rather than a physical impossibility, authorities allowed the estate to remain a hidden hazard on the coastline. In 2007, documentary filmmaker Ryan Keller arrived with a team of experts to debunk the Ravenshade legend. Equipped with high-end sensors and drone technology, they intended to provide a logical, scientific explanation for the manor's reputation. The environment changed the moment they approached. A total sensory vacuum surrounded the estate. No birds, no insects, and no sound of the wind despite the storm clouds gathering overhead. Guarding the entrance were massive stone statues with their faces violently gouged out. Local lore suggests the villagers disfigured them after the family vanished, though no one could explain why the features were replaced with these flat, unnatural plains. As the team cut the chains and pushed the gates open, the temperature dropped sharply. Despite the earlier warmth, the crew was suddenly exhaling visible breath in the freezing air of the driveway. The team proceeded, relying on their sensors to explain away the cold. They ignored the fact that they had crossed a threshold where the standard laws of the natural world were already beginning to fail. Inside, the house was a capsule of the 1949 crime scene. Dust covered the untouched tables, but the family portraits lining the halls had been targeted. Every painted face had been scratched away with the same violence seen on the statues outside. In the ballroom, a black piano began playing a hesitant, missing melody. The keys moved on their own, pressing down with a rhythm that sounded less like music and more like an entity struggling to mimic a human sound it didn't fully understand. Beneath the piano, a message appeared in the dust. The letters "You should have left" were pressed into the powder as if by invisible fingers, addressing the team directly. Seconds later, the team realized Emma was missing. Her radio crackled with heavy static and the sound of panicked breathing before she whispered a single, terrifying warning. "Don't let it see you." The manor was no longer a setting for an investigation. By isolating Emma and communicating through the dust, the house was actively participating in the hunt. At exactly 2:43 a.m., the temporal anomaly peaked. The lights throughout the estate flickered on despite the lack of electricity, and every grandfather clock in the mansion began ticking in a loud, synchronized rhythm. Marcus's drone scans revealed a structural impossibility. The interior of the mansion was significantly larger than the exterior walls allowed. The mapping software showed a hidden level defying the physical footprint. The geometry was shifting in real time. Corridors rearranged themselves, deleting exits, turning the floor plan into a maze of impossible angles. They found a hidden staircase behind a library fireplace that led upward into a space not shown on any blueprints. The wooden walls transitioned into rough black stone, covered in thousands of tally marks scratched into the surface. With the drone data failing to find a static exit, the reality became clear. Ravenshade operates as a tesseract. It is a structure that expands its own internal dimensions to trap and hold the people it marks. The impossible fourth floor was an endless corridor serving as a database. It was lined with photographs of every person who had disappeared near the manor for nearly a century. Among the old photos were new ones of the documentary team. There were shots of them arriving at the gate, entering the house, and even sleeping in their van earlier that day. Photos taken from angles that were physically impossible for a human photographer to reach. A tall, thin figure in old servant clothes stood at the end of the hall. Its movement was a blur of darkness, its face twitching so rapidly that it was impossible for the human eye to focus on its features. Then a colossal entity manifested, its face a shifting mass of dozens of different people, men, women, and children. When it spoke, the voices of the missing Ashcrofts and lost tourists layered together into a single, terrifying request for the team to stay. The entity was a collective of every victim the manor had claimed. Ravenshade consumes more than flesh. It absorbs the identities and physical forms of its visitors, weaving them into its own supernatural architecture. The team fled through the shifting hallways as the walls themselves began to scream. They managed to find the staircase and burst through the front doors into the freezing rain, collapsing into their van and driving away from the glowing windows of the manor. Months later, Marcus reviewed the corrupted drone footage from their escape. He was looking for an explanation for the shadows they saw in the windows, but found something much more disturbing. The night vision footage shows the team running toward the van, but there aren't 4 people in the frame. There are 5. Behind the survivors, a tall woman in black was walking calmly toward the vehicle. 6 months later, Emma disappeared from her locked apartment. The only clue was this photograph of the team on their first day at the manor. Scratched into the back of the photo were the words, "Dinner is at 2:43. Distance provides no protection from the manor's reach. Once the house counts a visitor and marks them at 2:43 a.m.,